Hello, my witchy friends. It's Vickabury ASMR, and happy week of the solar eclipse. I've always been fascinated with the history of solar eclipses, and as a witchcraft historian, I know that there have been quite a few things that have happened in human history with witchcraft and eclipses. So I thought it might be fun to tell you a couple of facts that I've compiled about solar astrological events and witchcraft, while showing you a couple interesting little objects, like this crystal ball here. If you're new here, please subscribe and join the coven. We are a very friendly and welcoming bunch, and we'd love to have you in our midst. So let me grab a little something to show you first. Now I think we should light a candle to start, perhaps. I have these matches with little bugs on them, and we'll just pull one out, really set the mood. So if we know the main concept of astrology, for those of you who are really into horoscopes, birth charts, all of those things, what we see in the sky usually has some kind of attributable meaning, right? And these meanings for thousands of years have been posited to affect behavior, the way that we act, the way that we think. That is something that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And here I have this black pumpkin candle, and the top just lives off like so. And it has a lovely little seal on it. And then see, this is a 2-wick candle. So we'll just strike the match. And it's quite a strong flame. And light the candle. so. And then we have a lit candle just for some ambient light. Oh, astrology and witchcraft have been intertwined, at least in the history of the British Isles, which is what I study the most closely. And eclipses, by the way, if you're going to watch the eclipse, be sure to wear protective eye gear. Make sure it's good protective eye gear and be so careful. Just a little PSA for my witchy friends. But eclipses are symbolically about the disappearance or accidental, at least they thought it was accidental, concealment of light. In ancient history, eclipses were seen as bad omens, which might herald some kind of impending disaster. So, in a lot of ways, it's about the end of a cycle, about new beginnings. And in many cultures, it's seen as a cataclysmic event. But the way that it's involved with witchcraft has kind of changed and evolved through the years. And I want to tell you, though we know very little about witchcraft and solar eclipses, in Western history, I know a couple things, so I thought it would be fun to tell you. Let me put this candle down. I'll show you this little compass, which has like a sundial on the top. It's really beautiful. What you decide to do for the solar eclipse in your practice in modern witchcraft is, of course, up to you and your practice. But I think it can be fun to just take in the beauty of the event, and it's sometimes nice to just reflect on the start of a new cycle, the new beginnings. Maybe something that I tell you today will inspire you. I always like to do spell jar magic. You can see in my Astara video what I'm doing usually is something like that. I'm going to link some of the resources that I used in this video in the description down below if you want to do a bit of further reading on the history of eclipses and witchcraft. And let me know if you like this video as well. I'm happy to do more like smaller niche topics like this, though the eclipse is a very big event. It's just that talking about witchcraft history specifically is quite niche. The back just looks like this. So I'm going to tell you about George Buchanan. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was a humanist, historian, and a poet. And he wrote Dysphoria. In it, he talks about solar eclipses. Let me get another little item to show you. This beautiful box with these little gems on it. I tried to pick things that reminded me, like, of the solar energy and power of the eclipse. So for this little bit of a story, I'm drawing from an article by Jane Ritter Patrick. Will be linked below. It's called Astrology and Supernatural Power in Early Modern Scotland. She explains that George Buchanan was an early skeptic of the way that things like astrology and solar eclipses affected us. So after, the Enlightenment, thinkers started to become a little more rational, question why we were being so superstitious about things. This actually led to the end of the persecution of witches, which happened until, at least as far as I know, the 1920s in some parts of rural England. But Buchanan was somebody who really argued that the true causes of natural phenomena really, shouldn't lead to superstitious practices and beliefs. And one of those superstitions, we can open this up. There are some little surprises inside this little box. What do we have? A couple of crystals. So one of the superstitions surrounding solar eclipses, one that I'm quite familiar with, the idea that eclipses could be caused by witch's magic. Here's a sunstone. I have another one of these somewhere that I'll show you as well, but just a nice hunk of sunstone. But one of the superstitions was that eclipses were caused by witches. And this was quite a common one. Witches were said to be able to work weather magic. Here's some honey calcite. Just trying to choose crystals based on how they look for the video. And a lovely piece of tiger's eye as well. But there was also a belief that solar eclipses, which were caused by witches' spellcasting, could be dispelled by striking gongs, striking them. Not only were the common people this period of time stricken with fear, but their leaders too dreaded the eclipse of the sun. This is what Ritter Patrick is saying. And the pallor of the moon in darkness. So people were very afraid of what they did not understand. And that makes sense. We can understand the eclipse because of science. It doesn't scare us anymore, but it would have been really, really scary to someone who didn't understand it. I've got this little butterfly. This is a really old specimen that I use as a paperweight. You can see it in my video from quite a while ago. A witchy hall of sorts. Oh, there's a really old medieval illustration, or it might be Renaissance period, I don't remember. And it's called Witches Working Weather Magic. You can see it if you watch my flip through of the Oxford Companion to Witchcraft. It's reproduced in there. You can Google it. But the North Berwick witches are a great example of how witches were connected historically to influencing the weather, the cosmos, any kind of large movement in the environment, human experience. And Buchanan was writing about his tentative kind of reassessment of the supernatural, astrology, and eclipses in the 1500s. So this was kind of a surprising viewpoint to have, considering we know that the 1500s were some of the most active years for witch trials, persecutions, executions, all of those things. Now, the North Berwick witches were famously known for influencing the weather and the cosmos at large. There's the famous story of James VI, who blamed the North Berwick witches for raising a tumultuous, terrible storm as he sailed with his new wife. James also maintained that, quote, there were certain seasons, days, and hours the conjurers observed in raising apparitions. So witches historically have always been connected with the cyclicality of the planets, the rotation of the earth, the seasons, everything. Now here I'll bring out my dictionary of symbols. This is one of my favorite guides to consult. There's lots of historical context, and it's by the wonderful Penguin reference. And if we look at the entry for eclipse, it says, an eclipse, insofar as it indicates the disappearance or concealment of light, is universally regarded as something dramatic, a sign of ill omen, heralding disaster. This was the case in ancient Egypt, in China, and although apparently hardly compatible with today's logical thought, in Cambodia as well. And then it goes over a couple of different cultural associations with eclipses. So I really am a historian of the British Isles, so I can tell you about as much as this book tells me, and Europe, the British Isles, and of course American witch history, but I have my limits. So if you know something about eclipses culturally that I haven't mentioned, please leave a comment. I always love learning new things. This also has an entry for the sun, of course, and if we think more broadly about the symbolism of the sun, right? It is multivalent as the reality of the sun itself provides a wealth of contradictions. When the sun was not a god, for many peoples, it was a manifestation of the Godhead, celestial epiphany. It could also be conceived as the supreme deity's son, or the rainbow's brother. The sun is the source of light, heat, and life, and its rays represent the celestial or spiritual influences which the earth receives. And this is a really long entry, like it continues for pages and pages because there's just so much surrounding the way that we historically understand the sun. The symbol of the heavens, right? It's above us, it powers light and life, and witches, for many, many years, were cultural scapegoats, and so seeing them as capable of controlling celestial powers just makes sense. And so when eclipses happened, fingers began to start pointing, right? So this is one of my favorite resources. I highly recommend if you're curious about symbols, if you want to read about even what your dreams mean. This is such a great book, and it gives you plenty of different entries. It's a really big book. So that's what the Dictionary of Symbols has to say about eclipses and the sun. Okay, I have this beautiful whimsical pillow here that I'm just gonna trace while I tell you some more stuff. So, with time, astrology in the spiritual sense, even astrology as it was connected to witchcraft, became less in vogue. And now I would say we are in a bit of a revival of sorts. And I love that. But the Enlightenment and a deeper understanding of science, the waves of skepticism, right, towards magical powers, which is really led to this slight decline and the subsiding of the persecution of witches, which was wonderful, of course. As Ritter Patrick says, even in the annual almanacs is in the 1700s. The weather forecasting, like if you've seen an almanac, it will have a forecast. In it, the weather forecasting that had been traditionally based on astrology was being mocked. So, right after the witch trial craze, things declined. This verse appeared in Edinburgh's New Almanac for 1713. And let me read it to you. It's really goofy and shows just how much astrology had lost its footing. The weather here we cannot want, least we displease the ignorant. So, English has changed in its pronunciation. Who thinks that mortals have a notion of weather in the planet's motion. Like that summarizes it really, really well, I think. Like you cannot define the weather through the planet's motion, they're saying. Like astrology, it can't mean anything. So that started happening in the 1700s. And with that kind of like went that connection to witches and eclipses and cosmic events. But there are a couple things that are still practiced and things that you can do to draw in that bit of ancient influence and things you might want to think about during the solar eclipse, which is very fun. Now there's one more historical figure that I want to tell you about. And her name was Aglaonice, or Agonice of Thessaly. And she was a female Greek astronomer. So like in ancient Greece, being a female astronomer, like that's quite cool. And she was seen not as a witch. That wasn't really a label that was being thrown around at this point in history. You'll hear more in ancient history, women being called sorceresses. So that's a more common phrase of sorts, being called a sorceress. But she was known for her ability to make the moon disappear from the sky. That's right, making the moon disappear from the sky. So what do you think was happening there? So she had mastered the art of predicting eclipses, right? She had it figured out before many of the common people did. I mean, that's kind of like witchy power in and of itself, right? So she was more known for predicting lunar eclipses, but she predicted many different types. And you might have also heard of other witches of Thessaly. They were often like speculated to be able to control the moon, and like they're connected to eclipses as part of their rituals and practices. But this is all hearsay. It's hard to know for heard of the practice of drawing down the moon. This comes all the way from ancient Greece. And if you're Wiccan, you know that this has become a staple of Wiccan rituals. This is when a coven's high priestess enters a trance and asks the goddess to speak through her. Now, technically, you can do a ritual of drawing down the sun. And this is this gigantic element encyclopedia of 5,000 spells. Like, it is a thick tome. And even though it has 5,000 spells, like, honestly, and a lot of historical spells, which I consulted for history, but there's still things missing from it that I wish were in there. But I've marked off a spell that they allude to. Take my bookmark out. They have a reference to drawing down the sun, and this is a form of scrying. I'd love to do a video on scrying. If that's something you're interested in, please leave a comment. But the spell is about drawing down the sun. So it's right here, using a mirror. And it says, on a bright sunny day, hold a small mirror in the palm of your hand, tilted to catch direct sunlight. Maintain this position for no more than a few seconds. 9 seconds is the maximum. That's it. The mirror is charged. The sun is so powerful that 9 seconds is all it takes. And half of that is probably more than sufficient. This mirror must be reserved for magical purposes. If it is accidentally used for another purpose, it must be cleansed, reconsecrated, and the ritual repeated. And of course, it goes over some of the other uses for magic mirrors. So since this is a sun-themed solar eclipse video, I thought that was kind of an interesting fact that there has been an adaptation of drawing down the moon to be drawing down the sun. So you might be wondering, what kinds of things should I do to celebrate the eclipse? Now again, that's up to you and your practice, but I'll tell you a bit of what I do. We can look at these pretty scissors together. These actually are for snuffing wicks. So you can unclose the wick and the scissors, like so. And then the candle is put out. And usually what I do is I journal and reflect. I know there's not a whole lot actually written about solar eclipses and witchcraft practice in the modern era, but I like to journal. I can show you my journal in a second here. And usually I make a little magic jar, magic box. I really should do a tutorial on magic boxes. They almost are like portable altars that you can like put in a bedside table. You can do really small ones that you can put in your purse or your bag. But I like to do that. Obviously solar eclipses don't happen very often, so you know, for any kind of cosmological event, I'm just kind of applying my knowledge of what I've done for those in the past, like the Perseid meteor shower or lunar eclipse or anything like that. And I can show you the journal. And I think I've shown it to you before on the channel, but it's just this beautiful celestial blue color. Very, very pretty. And it has shiny gilded edges. You can see. And yeah, I just sit with myself and kind of like reflect. I think it's a great time to think about your positionality in the same way as the positionality of the sun, right? But I'd love to know in the comments down below whether you're planning on watching the eclipse, if you were somewhere where you can see it, because you can't see it everywhere, though it's going to be over top of like some of the most densely populated parts of the world, which is very, very exciting. But I'd love to know what you do, what you're going to do, and how you might incorporate astrology into your practice. I don't talk about it a whole lot, just because like that's a whole other area of study, and I'm quite interested in practicing witchcraft in a way that's rooted in the past, as you all know very well. But yeah, let me know. I'd love to know. Look, I have a really tiny little cat. Oh, it's hard to see. Oh, it's a tiny little cat paperclip right here. I have one more thing to show you. Now, this might look like kind of a dubious source, but bear with me. The walking stick press books are actually pretty great and quite reliable. But this one's fun if you want to get just a quick source of inspiration for spells. And it's just called the Spells Bible, the definitive guide to charms and enchantments. And they also have a little sun-inspired spell, which I really, really like. This one is for Litha, which makes sense because the sun-inspired rituals and spells would be for Litha, because it's summer. But this one is called the Litha Flame Talisman Spell, and I'll just read you it to conclude today's video. So it's to draw energy and strength from the sun. Purpose, to gain energy that you can carry right through to the winter solstice. Background, and it talks about Litha, or the summer solstice, celebrating the sun at the height of its powers. So it feels fitting for a solar eclipse, right? We honor the strength of the sun just before the days begin to shorten. The sun has some positive physiological effects on humans. The spell enables you to capture some of that sun power to carry with you throughout the summer and all through the shorter days of the fall and early winter, all the way to the winter solstice. The sun is fire in its most elemental form, encapsulating even a little of its energy on the magical plane can provide great strength to those who invoke it. This talisman uses the powerful symbol of the sun's rays to magically embody that power. It should be prepared just before going outdoors into the open overnight in order to greet the sunrise on the longest day. As the dawn breaks, place the talisman on a stone or rock so that the first rays of the sun will shine down and charge it with strength. So you could adapt this in some way for the eclipse. And for this spell, you need 1 red candle, 1 white candle, matches or a lighter, 1 sharp iron nail, 1 plain copper disc with a hole through it. That might be a little harder to get, actually. 1 length of fine cord, 24 inches or 60 centimeters, and 1 tea light in a jar. And it says, light both candles. Using the nail, inscribe on the disc a circle divided by 8 lines meeting in the center and overlapping at the edge. Hold the disc in your left hand, then cover it with your right and close your eyes. For focus on the after image of the candle flames behind your eyelids, visualize it moving through your body to your solar plexus and through your hands into the disc. You could probably use a coin of some sort. Thread the pendant. Oh, it's so that you can thread it. You could use any kind of object and enchant it. And take it with you to greet the sunrise or for the eclipse. Place it on a rock next to the tea light, which should be lit as dawn breaks. As sunlight strikes the pendant, raise your arms and say, "Ignite the sacred fire within." Wear it until the winter solstice. So I might do some kind of adaptation of that, though I'm kind of undecided. But I hope that this video was interesting for you. And I hope that you have a lovely time viewing the eclipse. And to those of you who have made it to the end of this video and who sent me a little tip through Buy Me a Coffee, thank you so much. I was quite emotional as your support started pouring in. I really appreciate it. You can read the post. It's on my community tab. I'll link my Buy Me a Coffee, my tip jar. Sometimes it is financially quite hard to make these videos, to have time for them. So if you enjoyed this video, just let me know in the comments down below. Engagement helps a ton. Or you can leave me a tip. Every dollar helps me make more witchy magic and funds my research so that I can be here with all of you. So I hope that you have a very peaceful and restful sleep. And thank you for being here. And I'll see you again